A single dad pulled a CEO from danger at night. She was shocked when she discovered his past. Book. The rain started just after midnight. Lucas Reed pushed his mop cart down the marble corridor of Hale Medical Center, the kind of place where everything gleamed and nothing was supposed to go wrong. He was invisible here. That was the arrangement. Come in after everyone left. Clean what no one wanted to see. Clock out before the world woke up. He preferred it that way. Aisle 3. Elevator bay. He heard it before he saw it. A soft, heavy sound. Not a crash. More like something giving up. He stopped. Through the slim gap of the elevator doors, he could see a heel. A woman's shoe. Expensive. Unmoving. Not my problem. That's what he told himself. He hadn't been a paramedic in 4 years. He'd walked away from that life, from that version of himself, the one who thought he could save people. He knew better now. But the shoe didn't move. 3 seconds passed, maybe 4. Then Lucas dropped the mop. He pried the doors open with his bare hands. Inside, Victoria Hale, the woman whose name was on every wall in the building, was crumpled on the floor, her lips faintly blue, her pulse threading thin. No doctors. No cameras. No one watching. Just him. And a decision he thought he'd never have to make again. Stay with me, he said quietly, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. Don't close your eyes. She didn't know who he was. She wouldn't want to. Because when Victoria Hale opened her eyes the next morning and learned the truth, she didn't say thank you. She said, make sure no one finds out. Why would a woman who nearly died refuse to acknowledge the man who saved her? What was she so desperate to hide? And was it really about him at all? And if gratitude was the simplest thing in the world to give, why couldn't she? Act 1. The man behind the mop. Part 1. Lucas. The shift started at 11. It always did. Lucas Reed clocked in at the back entrance of Hale Medical Center the same way he'd done for the past 2 years. Badge tap, nod to the security guard, cart out of the supply closet. Mop, bucket, 2 bottles of industrial cleaner, a roll of paper towels he'd learned to double stock because the 3rd floor always ran out. He had his system. That was the thing about this job. It rewarded systems. You didn't have to think. You just had to move. Floor 1. Lobby, waiting area, reception desk. Floor 2. Administrative offices. Floor 3. Consultation rooms. Floor 4. He skipped. Night staff still working up there. He liked the silence of it. The predictability. No one called his name in a panic. No one shoved a chart in his face and said, "We're losing him, Reed. What do you do?" There was just the hum of the ventilation system, the squeak of rubber wheels on marble, and the occasional distant beep of a monitor somewhere above him. Peaceful. That's what he told himself. His phone buzzed at 11:24. Dad. Noah fell asleep on the couch again. Mrs. Abrams says he's fine. Don't worry. He almost smiled. That was his neighbor's way of telling him Noah had refused to go to bed and had charmed his way into staying up past 9. Again. Lucas typed back a quick thank you and pocketed the phone. Noah was 10. Smart enough to negotiate bedtime like a labor dispute. Stubborn enough to win. Lucas had no idea where he got it from. He pushed the cart around the corner toward the elevator bay on the east wing and stopped to wring out the mop. The marble here was a particular kind of pale gray, the kind that showed every scuff, every footprint, every invisible thing that people tracked in from the outside world. He'd learned to work in figure eights. Faster. More even coverage. Small things. That's what the job gave him. The small satisfaction of a thing done correctly. He wasn't thinking about anything else. He wasn't thinking about St. Augustine Medical Center 4 years ago. He wasn't thinking about the man on the gurney or the call he'd made, or the silence that followed in the break room, when everyone stopped pretending not to know what had happened. He wasn't thinking about any of it. He was just mopping. Part 2. Victoria. She wasn't supposed to be here. That was the thing Victoria Hale kept turning over in her mind as the elevator doors closed behind her at 11:41 p.m. She had 3 other facilities to review before the board meeting on Friday. She had a 6 a.m. call with her legal team. She had a stack of acquisition proposals on her desk that had been waiting since Tuesday. And yet here she was. Hale Medical Center, the original one, the first one, the building she'd built her entire reputation on, at nearly midnight, alone, because something in the quarterly report hadn't added up, and she'd decided that rather than wait until morning, she would simply come and see for herself. That was how she operated. Always had. Her assistant called it a flaw. Victoria called it efficiency. She pressed the button for the 4th floor and leaned against the wall of the elevator, scrolling through the report on her tablet. Staff turnover rate, up 4% to Archway. Patient satisfaction scores, down marginally. The maintenance log showed 2 HVAC units flagged for service. She'd need to follow up on that. The numbers were fine, mostly. But fine wasn't the standard. The elevator rose. She felt it then. The thing she'd been quietly ignoring for the past 3 weeks. A tightness in her chest, low and insistent, like a hand pressing from the inside. She'd told herself it was stress. She'd told herself it was the coffee. She'd told herself a lot of things. Her cardiologist had told her something different at her last appointment, and she'd listened politely and then rescheduled the follow-up twice. There was no good time for a heart to malfunction. Especially not hers. The tightness spread. Her left arm went strangely heavy. The tablet slipped. Not now, she thought, with the particular irritation of a woman who had never once allowed her body to inconvenience her schedule. The elevator shuddered to a halt between floors. And Victoria Hale, who had built an empire on the principle that nothing was outside her control, crumpled slowly to the floor. Part 3. The decision. Lucas heard it before he understood it. A sound. Soft. Wrong. Coming from the elevator shaft to his left. Not mechanical, not the usual groan of cables, but something heavier and more final. Like a weight dropping somewhere it shouldn't. He stopped. Looked at the elevator doors. The light above them read, between floors. He stood there. His hand stayed on the mop handle. The bucket dripped. The elevator light read, between floors. Not your problem. He thought it clearly and deliberately, the way you repeated something you were trying to make true through repetition. He was a janitor. Night shift. Whatever was happening in that elevator belonged to someone else. The medical staff on 4, security, literally anyone whose job description still included the word emergency. His didn't. He'd made sure of that. He pulled out his phone to call the front desk. Then he heard it. Faint. Dotty. Nearly nothing. But unmistakable to someone who had spent 6 years learning to hear it. A breath. Shallow. Labored. The specific sound of a body working too hard to do the one thing it was supposed to do automatically. He knew that sound. He stood there with the phone in his hand and did not move. You don't do this anymore. The thought came fully formed, the way it always did when something reached for the part of him he'd put down 4 years ago. You don't trust yourself with this. You know why? The breath came again. Weaker. He was aware, in a way he hadn't been in years, of his own hands. Whether they still knew what they'd once known. Whether knowing was the same as being safe to use it. 10 seconds passed. Maybe more. Then something simpler than a decision took over. Not courage. Not certainty. Just the plain arithmetic of a sound getting quieter and the door still closed. He put the phone away. The access panel for the elevator shaft was on the north wall, behind a locked maintenance cover. He passed it 100 times without thinking about it. He thought about it now. He found the override key on his facility keychain, the one labeled E11 that he'd never once used, and had the panel open in under 15 seconds. Manual release. Left handle. Firm, even pressure. The doors parted. She was on the floor of the elevator, on her side, one arm stretched out toward the wall. Dark blazer, dark trousers, one heel off. Her face was tilted slightly upward, and even in the dim light he could see the color was wrong. Not pale, but gray. The specific gray that meant the body was starting to make decisions the person hadn't authorized. He recognized her immediately. Her face was on the wall of the lobby. He didn't think about that. He stepped in. Hey. He kept his voice low, even. The same voice he'd used on 100 strangers in 100 bad moments. The voice that said, I am not panicking, so you don't need to either. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Pulse. Present, rapid, irregular. Breathing, shallow but continuous. Eyes, flickering. Cardiac event. Possibly arrhythmia. Possibly something worse. Can you hear me? Her eyes moved toward him. Not focused, but present. Stay with me, he said. Don't close your eyes. He loosened the collar of her blazer, checked her airway, tilted her chin slightly to open the passage. His hands moved the way they always had, without ceremony, without hesitation, the muscle memory of 6 years surfacing through 4 years of deliberate burial. He didn't let himself think about that either. With his free hand, he hit the emergency call button inside the elevator and spoke clearly into the panel. Medical emergency, East Wing elevator, between floors 1 and 2. Possible cardiac event. Female, approximately late 30s. I need a team down here now. A crackle. A voice. Sir, can you? I need a team. Now. He set the phone on speaker and turned back to her. Her eyes were still open. Barely. He could see her trying to focus, trying to understand where she was and who was kneeling over her and why his hands were on her like he had any right to be there. You're at Hale Medical Center, he told her, answering the question she hadn't asked. You're going to be fine. I need you to keep breathing, slow and steady. Can you do that? A pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Good, he thought. She's still fighting. He checked her pulse again. Still irregular, but holding. He positioned her carefully on her back, elevated her legs slightly with his folded jacket, kept 2 fingers at her wrist and his eyes on her face. Watching. Counting. This was the part no one told you about emergency medicine. The waiting. The space between when you've done everything you can and when help finally arrives. The minutes where all you have left to offer is presence. He'd forgotten how much that cost. The team arrived in 4 minutes. 2 nurses, a resident, and a crash cart. They spilled out of the stairwell door and into the elevator bay and took over with the efficient, slightly breathless energy of people who had been jolted out of routine. Lucas stepped back. He gave them the vitals, the timeline, his assessment, clean and clinical, the way he'd been trained. The resident looked up mid-handoff. Name? Reed? Lucas Reed, night shift. He clipped it the way he used to clip everything on a call. Name, roll, done. And then he stepped back further, out of the elevator, out of the way, until he was just a man in a gray uniform standing by a mop cart while they wheeled Victoria Hale toward the corridor on a stretcher. She turned her head as they moved her. For just a second, through the controlled chaos of the medical team around her, her eyes found him. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. Part 4. After. He finished his shift. That was the thing that would have seemed strangest to anyone watching, that after all of it, Lucas Reed wrung out his mop, restocked his cart, completed floors 1 through 3, and clocked out at 6:52 a.m., like nothing had happened. Because for him, nothing had. Not really. He'd done what the moment required. He hadn't done it because he was brave, or because he was good, or because he'd had some sudden revelation about who he was supposed to be. He'd done it because there was a woman on the floor and his hands still remembered what to do. That was all. He picked up Noah from Mrs. Abrams' apartment at 7, made breakfast, eggs, toast, the orange juice Noah liked, and sat across from his son at the kitchen table while the morning light came through the window and the city started up outside. You look tired, Noah said. I'm fine. You always say that. And I'm always fine. Noah gave him the long, evaluating look that 10-year-olds deployed when they suspected they were being managed. Then he went back to his toast. Lucas drank his coffee. He wasn't thinking about her. About the color of her face when he'd found her, or the way she'd nodded when he asked her to keep breathing, or the fact that somewhere on the 4th floor of the building he just left, Victoria Hale was presumably alive and receiving actual medical care from actual doctors. He wasn't thinking about any of it. He was just having breakfast with his son. That was enough. That had to be enough. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city was gray and washed clean and moving forward the way cities did. Indifferent, continuous, unbothered by the small private emergencies that happened inside it every night. Lucas finished his coffee, set the mug in the sink, and didn't think about it at all. But 3 floors above the lobby where he'd mopped the marble clean, In a private room at the end of a quiet corridor, Victoria Hale was awake, staring at the ceiling. A nurse had just told her what happened, who had found her, what he'd done, what he was. A janitor. The word sat in her chest like something she didn't know what to do with. She asked for her phone. "Make sure no one finds out," she said when her assistant picked up. "Oh, no." She said it like it was simple. She said it like it didn't cost her anything. Act 2. The Woman Who Watched. Part 1. The morning after. She woke up sometime before dawn. The private room on the 4th floor had a window. Victoria hadn't asked for it. Her assistant had arranged everything. The room, the specialist, the single white orchid on the bedside table that was meant to communicate "This is not a crisis" without anyone having to say it out loud. The orchid was a nice touch. Victoria noted it and said nothing. The cardiologist's name was Dr. Farrell. She was thorough, unhurried, and had the particular manner of someone who had delivered difficult news so many times that she'd stopped softening it. Victoria respected that. "Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy," Dr. Farrell said. "You've had the condition for years, most likely. What happened last night was your body telling you it was done being ignored. How long until I can return to work?" A pause. The kind that meant the doctor was deciding whether to answer the question asked or the one that should have been asked. "That depends on whether you take this seriously." "I take everything seriously." "You rescheduled your follow-up twice." Victoria looked at the orchid. "I'll need a revised medication plan and a timeline for full activity resumption. Have it sent to my office." Dr. Farrell wrote something in her chart that Victoria suspected was not entirely flattering. After the doctor left, the room went quiet. Her assistant had stepped out. The nurse wouldn't be back for another hour. Through the window, the city moved in its usual morning rhythm, indifferent, continuous, unbothered. She thought about what the nurse had told her. "A janitor found you. Lucas Reed. Night shift. He pried open the elevator doors and stayed with you until the team arrived." She'd asked for his employee file as a reflex, the same way she requested data on anything that had happened within her buildings without her knowledge. It arrived on her tablet within the hour. Photo, employment record, performance reviews. All unremarkable. 2 years of satisfactory assessments. Never late. No incidents. She looked at the photo for a moment. 40 years old. Dark hair going gray at the temples. The flat, neutral expression of someone who'd learned not to give anything away in official photographs. She closed the file. "Make sure no one finds out," she'd told her assistant. Not because she was ungrateful. She told herself that clearly. It wasn't about gratitude. It was about optics. About the story that would write itself if it got out. The headline that would follow her into every boardroom for the next 2 years. CEO of luxury medical chain, saved by her own janitor. The implication embedded in every word of it. That her buildings weren't safe. That her staff wasn't adequate. That she, of all people, had needed to be rescued. She didn't do rescued. She closed her eyes. Somewhere on the other side of the city, she knew, a man was going home from his shift. Going home to what? She checked the file again. A 10-year-old son? Making breakfast, probably. Living his life. Not thinking about her at all. The thought was strangely irritating. Part 2. The return. She was back in the office by Thursday. Her assistant said nothing, which was the correct response. Her board members said, "We heard you weren't feeling well," in the careful tone of people who had been briefed on exactly how much they were allowed to know. She accepted their concern with the same practiced composure she brought to everything, and moved on. There was too much to do. There was always too much to do. But on Friday evening, after the last meeting had cleared out, and her assistant had gone home, and the building had settled into its quieter after-hours register, Victoria found herself standing at the window of her office on the 7th floor with a glass of water she hadn't drunk, looking down at the East Wing entrance. The night shift started at 11. She told herself she wasn't waiting for anything. At 11:08, a man came through the back entrance with a cart. She watched him cross the loading bay and disappear inside. She couldn't see his face from here. She couldn't see anything useful. Really. Just a figure in a gray uniform moving with the particular economy of someone who knew exactly where they were going and saw no reason to rush. She turned away from the window, sat back down at her desk, opened the acquisition proposal she'd been meaning to finish. Read the same paragraph 4 times. On Monday, she told herself she was done with it. On Tuesday, she went back to the building at 11. Part 3. What she saw. She didn't plan to be there. That was what she told herself the following Tuesday, when she found herself on the second floor at 11:30 p.m. Badge in hand, having told the overnight security lead she was doing an unannounced facilities walk, which was true, technically, in the way that true things could still be incomplete. She was reviewing a facilities report that could absolutely have waited until morning. She was simply working late. She was always working late. The fact that the second floor shared a corridor with the East Wing elevator bay was entirely coincidental. The security feed would show her walking the corridor. It would not show what she was looking for. She heard the cart before she saw him. Lucas Reed moved through the corridor with the systematic focus she'd noticed in the file photo. Not distracted, not performative, just present in the particular way of someone who had made peace with invisible work. He mopped in even strokes. He checked the baseboards. He replaced a light bulb in the alcove near the fire exit that maintenance had flagged 3 weeks ago, and apparently forgotten about. She watched from the doorway of the administrative office. He didn't see her. Then, at the far end of the corridor, a door opened. One of the cleaning staff, a young woman named Rosa, whose name Victoria vaguely recalled from an HR review, was struggling with an overloaded supply cart that had wedged itself in a door frame at an angle. She was pulling at it with both hands, getting nowhere, her frustration quiet but visible. Lucas looked up. He set down his mop, walked to the end of the corridor, said something Victoria couldn't hear from this distance, and in 45 seconds had the cart free, the wheels realigned, and Rosa moving again. He didn't make a production of it. He went back to his mop without waiting for acknowledgement. Victoria stood in the doorway. Interesting, she thought. Which was not, she realized, the word she'd meant to think. She came back the next night, and the night after that. She told herself it was routine observation. She owned the building. She was permitted to walk her own corridors. She was simply conducting an informal assessment of night shift operations, which was a perfectly reasonable thing for a CEO to do. She watched him work. What she noticed, cataloged and refused to name as fascination was this. Lucas Reed was systematically, quietly, competent in ways that had nothing to do with cleaning floors. When an elderly patient wandered out of a recovery room on the 3rd floor disoriented and distressed, Lucas was the first person there, speaking calmly, guiding the man back without alarm, summoning the nurse with exactly the right level of urgency. When 2 orderlies couldn't figure out why a piece of equipment was making a grinding noise, he listened to it for 10 seconds, said something to them, and the noise stopped. And once, on a Wednesday night near the end of his shift, she saw him sit on a bench in the main corridor, next to a woman who was crying quietly into her hands, a visitor who'd clearly received news she didn't know what to do with yet. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just sat there. Present, not fixing anything, not moving on. Just there. Victoria watched that for longer than she intended to. Who is this man, she thought. It came out less like a professional question and more like something else entirely, which she shut down immediately and efficiently, the way she shut down everything that threatened to complicate a clean line of thinking. But the question stayed. Part 4. The VIP event. The quarterly stakeholder reception was held on the 3rd Friday of the month in the main atrium, catered, lit for photographs, attended by the 40 or so donors, investors, and civic figures whose goodwill kept the Hale Medical Network funded and frictionless. Victoria moved through it the way she always did. Handshakes, eye contact, the precise calibration of warmth that communicated "I value your presence," without suggesting "I need anything from you." She was good at this. She'd built the skill the same way she'd built everything else, deliberately, without sentiment. The event was winding down at 9 when she heard the sound. A sharp crack of glass. A chair scraping. Then voices rising in that particular pitch that meant something had gone wrong in a room full of people who didn't know how to respond. Near the far end of the atrium, a man in his 60s, Gerald Marsh, she recognized him. A board donor had gone down. Not cleanly. He caught the edge of the table on his way, and now he was on the floor between two overturned chairs while the people around him did what wealthy people at formal events always did in emergencies. They stood very still and looked at each other. Victoria was already moving, but someone else was faster. Lucas Reed, who had been running the service entrance on the far side of the atrium, delivering clean linens to the prep station, came through the side door at a near run, dropped to the floor beside Gerald Marsh, and had 2 fingers at the man's neck before anyone else had processed what was happening. "Give him space," he said, and the ring of frozen guests parted without quite knowing why. His voice had that quality again, the one Victoria remembered from the elevator floor, the one that didn't ask permission. She watched him work. It was different, seeing it from outside. From the floor of the elevator, she'd barely been conscious, hadn't been able to catalog what he was doing or how. But now she could see all of it, the assessment, swift and total. The way he checked airways and pulse simultaneously, his hands moving in the overlapping rhythm of someone who'd done this not 100 times but thousands. The way he spoke to Gerald steadily. "Sir, can you hear me? I need you to stay with me." While his other hand was already reaching back toward the wall where he'd somehow, in the 30 seconds since he'd entered the room, located the aid unit mounted beside the fire exit. She hadn't even known it was there. The medical team arrived in 3 minutes. In 3 minutes, Lucas Reed had kept Gerald Marsh's heart beating with a clarity and competence that she had not seen matched by anyone in the room, including the 2 physicians who'd been standing at the bar drinking sparkling water when it happened. He stepped back the moment the team took over. Same as before. Moved to the edge of the room. Folded into the background. Became invisible again. Victoria crossed the atrium. "Mr. Reed." He turned. For the first time she was standing in front of him, voluntarily, deliberately, in full light. His expression was careful. Not cold, just contained, the face of someone who had learned to take up less space than they were owed. "Ms. Hale." "That's the second time," she said. He didn't answer. "You've had medical training." It wasn't a question. Something moved through his expression, brief, gone before she could read it. "I took some courses," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Some courses?" The phrase sat between them like something deliberately placed in the wrong location. "We should talk," she said. "I have 2 more floors to finish." She blinked. In 15 years of running a company, she could not recall the last time someone had responded to, "We should talk," with a reference to their cleaning schedule. "Tomorrow," she said. "My office, 10 a.m. He held her gaze for a moment. Something in it that wasn't quite defiance, and wasn't quite indifference. Something in the middle, which she found, despite herself, considerably more interesting than either. "I'll be there," he said. And then he went back to work. Gerald Marsh was discharged 2 days later. Victoria knew because his assistant called hers, and because Gerald himself sent a handwritten note, the kind no one sent anymore, that said simply, "I understand there was a man on your staff. I'd like to thank him properly." She had her assistant reply that Mr. Reed preferred his privacy. She told herself that was true. She did not examine why she hadn't asked him first. Part 5. The file. She pulled his full background that night. Not the employee file, the real one. She had a researcher she used for acquisitions and due diligence, a former investigator named Carl, who was thorough and discreet and asked no questions she didn't want answered. The results arrived at 1 a.m. She read them at her desk with the city spread out behind her, quiet and dark. Lucas James Reed. Age 40. Licensed paramedic, certified, 2009. Employed at St. Augustine Emergency Medical Services for 6 years. Performance record, exemplary. Commendations, 4. Peer evaluations, consistently ranked in top 5% of responding personnel. She turned the page. Incident report, March 14th, 4 years ago. Responding unit to multi-vehicle collision. Route 9 overpass. 3 casualties. 1 survivor, adult male, critical. Reed, primary responder. She read the incident report twice. The clinical language of it was familiar to her. She'd read hundreds of medical incident reports in her career. This one was clean. Procedure followed correctly. No deviations flagged. No disciplinary recommendation. The survivor had lived. She read it again to be certain. Patient survived. Full recovery reported within 8 months. Lucas Reed had not made a fatal error. The man had lived. The report said so in the flat, unambiguous language of a process that had found nothing wrong. What stopped her was the addendum. A single paragraph at the end, filed not by a supervisor but by Lucas himself, a voluntary statement submitted 3 days after the incident, requesting an internal review of his own response time during minutes 4 through 7 of the call. The review board had found nothing. Response time, within protocol. Outcome, positive. Lucas had submitted his resignation 11 days later. She set the file down. A man who had survived the review, survived the outcome, and then reviewed himself, found nothing, and still walked away. No explanation on record. No dispute, no disciplinary action, no forwarding address to another medical employer. He had simply stopped. She set the file down, looked at the window, at her own reflection in it, composed, controlled, the face she showed the world so consistently that she sometimes forgot what was underneath it. He didn't lack ability, she thought. He lacked something else entirely. She thought about the way he'd sat on the bench next to the crying woman. Not fixing anything. Just present. She thought about the elevator floor. Stay with me. Don't close your eyes. She thought about the way he'd said I took some courses with the flat, careful delivery of someone who had learned to make themselves smaller than they were. She closed the file. 10 a.m., she thought. She had questions. That was all it was. A competent woman who asked questions when the data didn't add up. There was nothing else here. She looked at her own reflection in the glass for a moment. Then she opened the acquisition proposal and read the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing a word of it. She didn't examine that either. What she didn't know yet, what she couldn't have known, reading incident reports in an empty office at 1 a.m., was that the thing that had broken Lucas Reed wasn't the accident itself. It was what he told himself, in the silence after, about what it meant, and that those two things were not the same at all. Act 3, The Thing That Broke Him D, The Thing That Built Him Back. Part 1, 10 a.m. She was already at her desk when he arrived. That was intentional. Victoria Hale did not receive people from behind a closed door. She received them from behind a desk, positioned between 2 walls of glass that looked out over the city, in a chair that was neither aggressive nor deferential, but simply correct. The whole room was like that. Precise. Calibrated. Everything in it, communicating something she had chosen for it to communicate. Lucas Reed walked in wearing the same kind of clothes he wore to work. Clean, dark, nothing that announced itself. He looked at the room, the way he looked at everything. She was learning. Steadily, without performance. He sat down without being asked. She noted that. Thank you for coming, she said. You said 10 a.m. I did. She folded her hands on the desk. I'll be direct. I'd prefer it. I know who you are, she said. Not Lucas Reed, night shift. Lucas Reed, paramedic, St. Augustine EMS, 6 years, top of your unit. 4 commendations. 1 incident that didn't cost anyone their life, and a resignation 2 weeks later that nobody asked for. The room was very quiet. His face didn't change. Not exactly. But something in it stilled, the way water stilled when something moved beneath it. You had no right to pull that, he said. Quiet. Quiet. Even white? No, she agreed. I didn't. I pulled it anyway. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up. Then we're done here. Lucas. I came because you asked. He said it without heat, without performance, the way he said everything, but underneath it, something that had not been there before, something with an edge. I didn't agree to be a subject. She didn't move. Didn't reach for the professional register she used to manage difficult conversations. She just said, I know, sit down anyway. Something in the directness of it stopped him. He stayed standing for another moment, long enough that it was clear it was his choice, and then he sat. Why? He said. She considered the question. She'd prepared an answer for it. A clean, professional answer about due diligence and staff assessment and the responsible management of an incident that had occurred on her property. It was a good answer. It was the kind of answer she gave without thinking. She gave him the other one instead. Because you've saved 2 people in my building in the past 3 weeks, and you keep going back to mop the floors afterward. I wanted to understand that. He looked at her for a long moment. Now you do, he said. Is that all? No. She reached for the folder on her desk. Not the background file, a different one, prepared that morning. I want to offer you a position. Part 2. The offer, the refusal. She slid the folder across the desk. He didn't open it. Director of Emergency Response Training, she said. New role, created for the position. You design and implement a first response protocol across all 12 Hale medical facilities, train staff, build curriculum. You'd be working with our medical directors, our risk management team. No. She stopped. You didn't read the offer. I don't need to. The compensation is. It's not about the money. He said it without edge, without apology, just the flat delivery of a true thing. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but the answer is no. She sat back, studied him. In 15 years of negotiation, she had learned that most refusals were the beginning of a conversation, not the end of one. A no that came this fast, this cleanly, was usually a no with a wall behind it. And walls, in her experience, had reasons. The man at your incident, she said carefully. He survived. Something moved across his face. Brief, and then gone. I know. Then what? Miss Hale Deal. He said her name with a kind of quiet finality, like a door closing. I'm grateful for the offer. Genuinely. But I don't belong in that world anymore. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. Is it? She leaned forward slightly. Because from where I'm sitting, you belong there more than half the people I employ with medical degrees in corner offices. I've watched you work. I've read your record. The gap between what you are and what you're pretending to be is. You don't know what I am. The words came out with more weight than anything he'd said before. Not angry. Something older than anger. She held his gaze. Then tell me, she said. Part 3. What he carried. He didn't tell her. Not that morning. He stood up, thanked her in the same even tone he used for everything, and left the folder unopened on her desk. She didn't call after him. She sat for a long time after he'd gone, looking at the city through the glass. The folder sat on her desk like an unanswered question. She thought about what he'd said. I don't belong there anymore. Not, I don't want to. Not, I've moved on. Not any of the clean, forward-looking phrases people used when they genuinely left something behind. I don't belong there anymore. Like belonging was something that could be revoked. Like he'd been the one to revoke it. What she didn't know, what Lucas had never told anyone, not the incident review board, not his supervisor, not the colleague who'd driven him home that night and sat with him in the parking lot for an hour because he couldn't make himself get out of the car, was this. The man on the Route 9 overpass had lived. But for 11 minutes, between the moment Lucas arrived at the scene and the moment the man's pulse stabilized, Lucas had been certain he was going to die. Not feared it. Not worried about it. Known it, in the specific, terrible way that experienced paramedics sometimes knew things, a read of the situation that came from thousands of hours and a kind of pattern recognition that lived below conscious thought.